Welcome to the Impact My Life podcast, where we try to provide self-defense for life and help you live your best life. Today's guest is one of my good friends, Dakota Knuckles-Malone, recently married, and he's going to be sharing just habits, routines. He's huge into personal development, and is always an interesting conversation. So welcome, Dakota. Thank you for joining us.
Jason, thank you for having me. Super pumped to be here and love what you've put together with this show. And thank you for the invitation to come on.
Yeah, I'm going to start with an intro because, most people don't know you. So I want them to have an idea of, what you do for a living and how you live your life. So I'll do an intro and then we'll get into the interview. Does that sound good?
Cool. Let's go.
Awesome. All right. Dakota Knuckles-Malone is a husband, an entrepreneur, and someone who cares deeply about building his life resume. He grew up in a small town in central New York, currently lives in St. Louis with his wife, and his career is aimed at leaving a positive impact on the world using clean energy. Dakota mentors a group of men weekly. His community, Better Brother, is focused on helping young men initiate into adulthood by exploring their inner world and hosting conversations on what it's like being a man. He's a 5 heart surgery survivor, an explorer, and someone who tries to inspire others by being open about sharing wisdom learned through his own personal trials. So I kind of wanted to start, one of the things I've always admired about you is just part of it is how well spoken you are, but also how committed you are to your own personal development. And it seems like you're always studying something. You're always, improving yourself, each and every day. So what I'd like to do is just go back to the moment where that started for you. Was there a moment growing up when you realized you wanted something different for your life and started pursuing, personal development?
Yeah. So I'm happy to bring you right into the story. And it starts off with a little bit of tragedy, but I'm still here. So I promise it ends well. I was 16 years old. I had a heart rate of 214 beats per minute going on 3 hours. I was in the ER. It was packed and overcrowded. I had to share a room with a guy who had a heart attack and died next to me. The doctors were shoving my face into buckets of ice, trying to slow my heart rate down. I had my dad and my grandfather with me. And the doctor walks in and he says, "Dakota, we need to reset your heart." And I remember looking past the doctor in that moment and seeing my generations before me, my dad and my grandfather, and just the horror on their face, which did not make me feel any better. And, in that moment when your heart is beating that fast, you already feel like you're going to die because your body is using all of the energy to keep your heart beating. And in that moment, I had this moment of clarity of just like, my father and my grandfather will outlive me. And, at 16 years old, I remember reflecting on like, I didn't get a full life. I didn't even make it past high school. And, this is going to be the end for me. And something about, the doctors chose to work on my life instead, simply because I was younger, which is, a huge burden to carry as a 16-year-old, at least at the time. And, I took a lot of self-blame for that. I had a lot of guilt for that. And I also had a lot of shame for that because it felt like there was something wrong with me. Guilt and shame are really interesting emotions, Jason, and to deal with them at a young age is one thing. But I look at shame as something that is viewed something material wrong with our identity versus guilt is about something you may have done or did, as an example. So I had a lot of shame. And I had a lot of these physical traumas from my 5 heart surgeries, which I'm happy to talk about. But those moments, and ultimately, I'm alive and I'm 32 now and healthier than ever, I might add. But those experiences at a young age really drove me to look at the world in a different way. It changed the landscape of my life, and it really changed the dial on what was important, what mattered to me, and really what I wanted to do with myself. And so through a lot of healing and a lot of working on those physical traumas, I explored things like language and hypnosis specifically. I did 100 hours under Tony Robbins as a young man, just trying to understand, how can I change my life? How can I move on from these things that had happened to me? And I slowly realized that life does not happen to us, it happens for us. And this long journey of personal development began for me based off of something really tragic, which were, those operations and experiences that I had to go through. But ultimately, through the work of Tony and, some of his philosophies around the 6 human needs, which is just really quickly, Jason, this idea that everybody is trying to meet their needs. And this is why we all live our lives in a unique way, because some of us value some of these needs more than others. And there's essentially 2 out of the 6 that people generally prefer. And that's how they go about living their lives. And so very quickly, the needs are security, the need to feel safe. And then there's uncertainty, the need for variety and things to just be different and essentially not the same. There's the need to be significant and important, which is extremely important for men. We want to feel respected, whereas most of the time women want to feel safe and loved, right? So security, variety, significance, and then there's love. Everybody has that need. And then there are the needs of the spirit, which are the final 2, and that's growth and contribution. And essentially, Tony's theory is that the more you invest into the needs of the spirit, you will automatically meet the former 4 needs. And so at a young age, I did my best to connect everything that I did to growth, which is where personal development came from, and contribution, which is this idea of impact, which, side note, is why I love your podcast and your philosophy, the stuff that you teach at your gyms, and this idea that we can have an impact on our life. And the way that I try to do that is through growth and contribution. So I hope that lays at least a little bit of landscape for where all that came from.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I can't imagine that had to be so sobering at 16 years old to be faced with, life and death. And then afterwards, one of the things we talk a lot about in our school is adversity and failure is your friend and coming back strong. How did you deal with, after surviving 1 heart surgery, then having to go through it 4 more times? That type of adversity would make some people give up. It would make some people, just take a step back and have trouble dealing with that. But, in your case, it seems like you persevered and thrived. How did you do that? And how did you feel when you had to have 4 more after that initial one?
Sure. I had my first 2 as soon as I was born. So don't remember them other than, I would say energetically. Of course, the body, there's a really good book, I'm sure somewhere behind me, The Body Keeps the Score. And it's this idea that even if we can't actually remember or have the memory of an event happening to us, our body somatically remembers that experience. And so aside from the somatic experience of growing up, going to the cardiologist once a year, and my body remembering what I went through as a child, being ripped from my mom's arms and being operated on and torn open as a baby, those were all really difficult things that thankfully I don't quite remember. But I will tell you that it was my 5th and final heart surgery a week after I graduated high school that really changed everything for me. And it's really just a matter of perspective. And for me, I was in the pediatric ICU. So I was 17 at the time. And we were in a hospital floor surrounded by kids. I remember that I was still wrapped up like a mummy. It was maybe the first night, maybe the second night after my open heart surgery. And, you're wrapped up because they want to be able to make sure that you're secure. Mm-hmm. And I could only use my eyes at the time. And kitty corner to my room, Jason, was a child much younger than me. I was 17. He was probably 7. And he had also just had open heart surgery, obviously at a much younger age. And the only way you can leave the hospital after an operation like that is you have to drain all of the excess blood out of your chest and into a bucket. The only way you can do that is by walking. So you have broken ribs, you're in a lot of pain, and you have to physically move through adversity on top of the mental and emotional experience through all of this. You actually have to get up and move, which I think is ultimately a really good metaphor for how adversity should be looked at. Because when we apply motion, which implies commitment, as in, I am going to make it through this, going into a language pattern, then all of a sudden we can start to move beyond what happened to us and really begin to work through it, which is the most important. But for me, watching this 7-year-old with no family around, no nurses around, get up out of bed and start physically walking down the hallway. And again, I could just follow him with my eyes. To this day, Jason, I don't even know if this was real. I don't know if this was an angel. I don't know what was going on, but I will tell you that that moment changed the dial of my life. Mm-hmm. Because what had happened was I was able to get perspective on my own suffering. And I remember staring at that child who eventually made his way back to the bed, and he just started crying by himself, all alone. And in that moment, my entire heart was flooded with compassion. And ultimately, I think that's how we make it through suffering, is by this understanding that we are all related through this human experience. And for me, that compassion really allowed me to start my own healing journey, start to move beyond that, but then also be inspired by someone, which became a really big theme for my life, because that child, without seeing that experience, I don't really know how my life would have went. But
Hmm.
because I was inspired by someone doing something extremely difficult alone and moving through his own trials, I was able to get perspective on that for myself, and then ultimately, be able to help myself, which is what is required to move beyond our things that have harmed us, through things that are difficult. Nobody's going to do it other than ourselves, but we're definitely allowed to be inspired. And so compassion really had that really big lever change on my life.
It's interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about it. One of our teenagers a few years ago went through cancer treatment at the Golisano, the children's hospital here. And I feel like you did, a lot of the kids that go through that come out with an idea of gratitude and contribution, because to this day he loves candy and he does a candy drive. We collect candy at our schools, at our martial arts schools, which kind of goes against our message there of eating healthy and being healthy. But we collect candy and he distributes it up at Golisano every year, and it made me think, that probably your reaction to that is probably a common one, where there's gratitude and you want to contribute, to help the next crew going through awful situations like that. One thing that you said that you were talking about high school also. I did a little bit of a deep dive. I listened to a couple podcasts with you. There was one with two younger guys. They're probably like, I don't know, 16, 17, that I really enjoyed. They were characters. But one theme that kind of interests me is you seemed, when you got out of high school, very resistant to college. And I was talking to my twins about this. My twins are about to turn 22. And my son said, how is it different now than when we were born? Because when they were born, it was, I don't care what you do with your life, but you're going to go to school and, you're going to get your degree and then you can do whatever you want. When it came to the end of high school, for me, it seemed like there's a bit of a tipping point where the ROI just wasn't there. So my son ended up being a plumbing apprentice and my daughter ended up going to school. But in that 20 years, it went from a must do to a, as long as you have a path, whether it's owning your own business or a trade, something like that. So it seems like you were kind of ahead of the curve. Where did that come from? And you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I was that kid. As soon as I got my laptop, I remember having like the sheets over my head at night and Googling jobs that can make at least $100,000 a year, which was like the number for me as a whatever 15-year-old. And I was like, without a college degree. And I think that through, especially as I graduated high school and figured out what I wanted to do next, I had this idea that I wanted to get out and see the world. And to me, I think it's very much attached to my own personal journey and going through those experiences, almost dying at 16 and realizing that life is not only very short, but also life is really large and there's a lot to be explored in our outer world as well as our inner world. And so I just don't I say don't. At the time, I didn't. And still, I have a very rebellious personality. I just didn't like the idea of following along with what everybody else was doing. And, transparently, Jason, my education was not that great. I went to public school in central New York. I went to Hannibal, so very small town. I graduated with less than 100 kids. And I was like an okay student. I was smart, but not necessarily engaged. And my sister had gone to college. She was a year older than me. I ended up going to community college for 2 years. I ended up handing my degree to my parents, and then I asked them to leave me alone and let me figure it out. And ultimately, during that in-between phase, I founded really what would be the start of my career in the energy space, which was becoming a door-to-door salesperson. At the time, it checked all of my boxes. I had zero sales experience, Jason, but for me, it was like adventure, unknown, uncertainty. It reminds me of like the job. I don't even know if this is a real thing, but it was like back in maybe the 1400s when they were exploring the New World, there was a job ad and it was like, job, go explore the New World, pay minimal, survival uncertain, like a real men apply inside. And it
Yeah.
was like the call to adventure. And that's what door-to-door sales was for me as a 18, 19-year-old. I saw my friend was making a bunch of money doing it. And I was like, dude, I don't care what we have to do. I will figure this out. And I wanna go down and pursue this path. And ultimately, thankfully, I ended up being really good at sales. And that again ultimately led into my next path, which was entrepreneurship. But I think, Jason, it really started with just a need to want to do something different. My dad did not go to college. He works locally at the aluminum plant Novelis, and he has been sent all over the world for a lot of the stuff that Novelis has done over the last decade or two. He's been there for 38 years or 39 years at this point. And so I knew that I could always, like, I believed at the time that I could still have a great career even if I failed and I didn't have to go to school. But then I think just really it was a sprinkle of luck that I ended up falling into something that I really enjoyed, checked off all my boxes, and allowed me to go out and explore the world.
That's great. Also, one thing I found out is I didn't realize you were an Eagle Scout. Kind of interesting. We years ago, we had a dad at our dojo that he was on some sort of an admissions board for Princeton. And he goes, I don't know how you're going to use this. He goes, but you might find it interesting. He said, when most colleges are on the fence with a candidate, whether or not to admit them or not admit them, he goes, there's 3 criteria that they look for. One is being some sort of a virtuoso with like piano or violin, being a black belt, or being an Eagle Scout, just because of the level of dedication that it takes to achieve that. You know, what are some attributes that you pulled from, you know, that career in scouting that have helped you, you know, going forward?
I listened to a video clip the other day, and it was by the School of Hard Knocks, the guy who goes and interviews billionaires. He makes a bunch of great content. And he asked a billionaire, what is one of the best business books of all time? And this guy said the Boy Scout Handbook, which I thought was super interesting. And ultimately, I agree with him on. I think that as far as values go, it's not even so much anything specific. Of course, we have like, you know, the 12 laws or values that we carry as scouts. But I think it's the idea of being, at the time, a boy with a sense of orientation, with a sense of knowing what values are, knowing what it means to carry them, and then really being able to use that to build your character. So for scouting, it's trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Those are the 12 Scout laws.
He's definitely an Eagle Scout. He remembers them all.
It took me a second. It took me a second.
That's pretty good, though.
Yeah. And again, it's not that you necessarily take all of those and embody all of those, but it is something that, again, you know, we're so easily programmed as kids, for better or for worse. Our neuroplasticity is essentially like a soft clay when we're young. And that's the best time to learn and grow and instill something like values and character building. And so for me, you know, I remember kicking and screaming Monday nights because my dad made me go to church school and then Boy Scouts. And so I wasn't home until like 8:30 after school all day, getting to school at like 6:30, and I hated it. And I remember kicking and screaming in the back seat, like, Dad, I want to quit. I hate this. I don't want to do Boy Scouts anymore. And he's like, I don't care. Like, and that was that. And so very quickly, like once I gave up on trying to quit, I was committed to finishing and, you know, ended up going on to get my Eagle Scout Award, which was an extremely meaningful thing for my life, has made me a ton of money from being an entrepreneur and also all of the things that it gave me. But it really did build me as a foundational young man for someone who is prepared to enter the world and be a person who carries values.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. As an entrepreneur, you're going to face a lot of adversity, you know, a lot of ups and downs. Nothing compared to the life and death that you did growing up, but you're still going to be faced with a lot of adversity. What sort of mental framework, like what do you rely on when you're in those tough situations, you're having those tough weeks or tough days, the deal fell through, you know, something's going on, you know, how do you handle it?
There's something that I think is extremely helpful that I pulled from Alex Hormozy, who I'm a big fan of. And if you take 365 days, which is a full calendar year, and you essentially figure out that the worst 10% of your days happen once every month, like once every 10 to 15 days, then on those days that are really difficult, it's really just a reframing of like, oh, this is what a bad day feels like.
Yeah. Gives you a little
Like,
perspective.
yeah, it goes back
Minimize
to the
rather than
perspective.
maximize.
It goes back to the perspective. And for me, that's been a really good reminder because, again, it's no longer surprising.
Mhm.
And when you treat it as something that is absolutely going to happen, you come to appreciate it and just acknowledge it for what it is, which is just a bad day. It doesn't mean your career's over, although it can certainly feel that way. In the clean energy space, we call it the solar coaster because one day you're up and then the next day business is crazy. And it really does feel like a ride. And especially in 2026, especially with everything that's going on in the world, it's easy to be in a place of finding yourself in adversity and fighting through to make things happen. But again, that's what's required, especially in entrepreneurship. And whether you are built to be an entrepreneur, as some people say, or if you think anybody can do it, it really doesn't matter. But it is about going back to this. The Scout motto is "Be prepared." It's like when you are prepared, then you can have this expectation that, like, okay, there may be a time where things are hard, things are difficult, and that's okay. And I think it's important to be able to move through those things. But then, going back to the personal development side of things, Jason, like, inside of our darkest shadows are our deepest treasures. So there are things on an individual level that may make our days more difficult, not just because it's a bad day at work, but because we're actually dealing with something. And these shadows, I believe, are unique to us. We all deal with different versions of this. But inside of those shadows, inside of that darkness, are these gifts that when they can emerge, when we can have the awareness of what they are, they ultimately rise to the top and help us build our character, move through the world with stronger values, and ultimately impact the world and contribute in our own unique way, which can also, obviously be directly related to entrepreneurship and the way that we show up to our business.
And I think a lot of times people, you probably get similar to me. People are always saying, "Man, you're just always in a good mood. You always seem upbeat," and I generally am because I think one of my biggest principles in life is just gratitude. Like I realize, like I'm grateful. I have a great business, great family, great students, great people in my life, great friends. I'm very grateful because I realize that everybody doesn't have that. But that being said, it's not automatic. So, what are like some success habits that you'd recommend to people? How do you stay? I mean, part of it is obviously consuming positive material and continuing to study and learn, but what are some of your success habits that keep you, upbeat, productive, the person that people want to be around?
I think hearing you say you're able to have and find so much gratitude, Jason, is super important. And I think a key piece to that, just knowing what I know about you and your business, I think it's super important to have community because you can have all of the success in the world, but it is lonely in certain senses. And also, I'm hearing you say that it's easy, maybe not easy, but it's more automatic for you to find gratitude. And, another thing I've seen is that there are plenty of billionaires who are miserable. There are people who have materially everything, and yet they are empty inside. And so, knowing that you have enough, going back to as far as a success habit, it's really a mindset. And it's understanding that there is nothing externally that is going to fill you up. And it's our responsibility to be able to find wholeness in our own lives. The external piece that I think is important is this idea of community. And so I can imagine you go into your gym, your dojo, and it's you helping other people grow. It's you knowing you are contributing to other people creating healthy habits and living their lives in a way where they can feel good about themselves and they can find gratitude. But it's done in a community-based environment, which I do think is extremely important when we're talking about what's on the outside. When it comes to success habits internally, I think that there are a wide range of things. For me, I've gone through phases of breath work and meditation and yoga. All of these things have been extremely helpful. And getting older, am realizing that they're not necessarily required to be quote unquote successful. Really comes down to what your definition is. Like the person who wakes up at 4 a.m. and then has a 2-hour morning routine doesn't necessarily become more successful than the person who just wakes up and immediately starts working. So I do think it's hand tailored. I do think, like for me personally right now, I just bought a sauna, red light, and PEMF kind of all in one thing. And right before bed for me, sleep is super important. I like to turn on that PEMF mat so that it has a very, it has a specific frequency that sets me up for good sleep. I get a good sweat. I get some red light in, and then I go and shower, and then I get in bed, and I am currently getting amazing sleep. So as far as top of mind, that's one of the things that comes to the top of my mind, Jason. But the success piece is interesting because I study a book. It's called The Gene Keys, and it's a very large
Can you
text.
say it? I missed the title. Can you say that again?
Yeah, it's called The Gene Keys by Richard
Okay.
Rudd. And essentially it is a mythical book. It's a book filled with lots of wisdom, and it's about the idea of how consciousness comes into the world. And the story goes that this guy woke up in an altered state one day, and he was in an altered state for 7 days. And he essentially downloaded a ton of information. Took him 7 years to write it, but he wrote this book called The Gene Keys. And one of the themes that I was just recently talking about with my men's group is this idea on personal development and our desire to constantly grow. And it's interesting because I have been someone my entire life, or at least my young 20s up until my 30s, who has been on that wheel of self improvement. And it's really hard for me to ever be satisfied in the past because it was like as soon as I got somewhere, it's like behind mountains are more mountains and behind peaks are more peaks. So I've been finding that as I scale to the top and I realize I made it to the top, I look out, Jason, and it's just more things to climb. And so I'm realizing, and as I'm getting older now, that it's not necessarily about getting to the top of the mountain. It's about being on the journey and the way that that hike and exploration and being on that trail, it's about the way that it affects you and the way that we show up. And so, especially for me, growing up, I had this hunger. And I realized that this hunger always left me feeling empty because as soon as I got a goal, I realized that I would be emptied again and I would need to go set a new target. And so when we can continue to grow, but not for the sake of our own self improvement, but for wanting to serve the world and going back to contribution and growth for different reasons other than making ourselves better, all of a sudden I'm finding, again, I don't know if this is the case for everyone, but what I'm finding is that I am orienting to a life filled with more service, being more helpful to others. And for me, it feels great because I'm no longer hungry or needing specific success in my life, but really it's a byproduct. So I can wake up every day like you are and saying, wow, I do feel positive. I do feel like I'm impacting the world. I do feel like I'm making a difference. And that uniquely makes me feel whole. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I love that analogy too. And I think that's something that our Profound group has helped me with over the past couple of years is, there's a lot of members that are kind of the next generation up from me. And it's not, their mindset isn't, okay, here's the finish line. Their mindset is they're enjoying the journey. And I think for me, a lot of times people, rush towards retirement and they can't wait to retire. And for me, like, it's not even on my radar screen because I just enjoy what I do. And I think that's something that Profound taught me too, is that, like, if the journey's fun, don't end it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I actually am really influenced. Another author that I'm really into is Tim Ferriss, and he
Yeah.
wrote The 4 Hour Work Week, which is what popularized him as an author back in the day. And I remember reading that book, and he had a concept called mini retirements. And I read this sometime in community college or doing door-to-door sales, and I was like, wow, I would love the idea of only working 4 hours a week. And there's a lot of good information in that book, but one of the things he talks about are mini retirements. And it's this idea of essentially not waiting to retire because by the time that you do, you're usually old and out of shape and needing to take medicines and can't really get around as well as you could when you were younger. And so, I try to practice this idea of going on mini retirements. And in fact, in 2017, I quit my job doing door to door sales because essentially I was in such bad health. I was killing myself for somebody else. This was before I got into launching my own business. I essentially quit, left my office behind. My best friend called me up. He double dog dared me to move to Italy. He was in the military at the time. He's like, you can come live with me for free. You should just come on over to Europe. And so I did. And so I went on this mini retirement in 2017. I saw 13 different countries. I learned the power of remote work before it was cool, before COVID came. And, that year I invested in Bitcoin in 2017. But really my commitment was to learn how to make money from my laptop and obviously enjoy a certain lifestyle, which was living at the base of a mountain in Italy and then taking a bus to wherever, Venice, and then getting on the train and going to Barcelona. And so I totally agree. Like, this idea that there is some sort of finish line for us is probably a rhetoric and probably an idea that we've been sold by the Rockefellers of the world and other people who benefited from this industrialization of people, where it's like, go to school, get educated, work a 9 to 5, and then you retire and everything's great. And then we're slowly starting to realize, like, oh, maybe that's not actually the best path for, me as a human being who really just wants to be of service, be in community, feel loved, feel like our needs are getting met. And I think a different playbook is totally okay. And I agree with you, like, being surrounded by the right people who are successful and who are further ahead than we are able to kind of flag that and say, hey, wait, how about you think of something else? And that is what allows us to shape our lives in a way where we can slowly start to become more fulfilled without needing to believe that we have to follow this certain path. Otherwise, it's like success, failure. I just don't believe life is that black and white.
Yeah. One of my, when I did my deep dive, I came across one of your quotes that I had never heard before. And it's, I study a lot of the same people as you. So I don't know if this is an original one or you read it somewhere, but it says, words are magic. That's why it's called spelling. And I thought about that all night last night. That's a really good one. Can you talk a little bit about how controlling your language patterns helps you in your life?
Yeah, this is extremely important to me. It was one of the huge unlocks that changed my life. And again, a lot of it started as a way to try to resolve my own physical trauma from all of my heart surgeries. My third heart surgery, I was wide awake for it. And I was leaving my body and watching myself get operated on because it was just so traumatic. I had to leave my own body. And so with that, there was a lot of things I needed to work through. And ultimately, I came to realize, Jason, that our language unlocks our emotion. And I will use the gym as an example because I think it's a simple one, but it's like when you're lifting any sort of weight and you're working up a sweat, you're doing something difficult. Let this be a metaphor and map over. When you're doing something difficult, if you're trying to pick that weight up and you're saying, I can't do it, that language pattern is physically making you unable to do it. And it's not just about positive language, but it is about this idea that our unconscious controls our life. And we so easily get caught in our own language patterns. Like, there are things that, I imagine when people pass on, they're like, oh, Uncle Bobby always used to say, blah, blah, blah. And that language pattern was probably in that person since a child. And so we're walking through life using these beliefs, but really these beliefs are using us. They are actually controlling the way that we move through the world. And we don't see that we are locked into our own language patterns. And so it's not just about reframing. Again, it's not just about like being positive, but I'm a big believer in something called clean language. And so if someone's constantly like, I don't want to be broke, I don't want to be broke, what they're really asking for is to be broke, because the mind does not register. The unconscious does not register don'ts and won'ts and can'ts, right? So when someone wants something like abundance, as another example, it's like, and there's another piece to this. There's layers to learning this, which took me years. So sticking at the 101 version of it, going from I don't want to be broke to I want to, and then speaking whatever it is you actually want. And then it's funny because going to the 201 version as an example, when we say want, we are in a state of desire. Mm-hmm. Okay. When we are in a state of desire, that is not a state where we are able to actually feel gratitude because we're stuck wanting something. Right. So the 201 version of this is not only getting the clean language, but it's moving to a place where you are already receiving what it is that you are claiming that you want. So it goes very, very deep. There's 101, 201, 301, 401. Sure. But I remember learning as a young man, one of the very first things I needed to do was replace a lot of the words that I was using because I had this guilt, because I had this shame, and I was being really hard on myself. I was very judgmental because that shame, as I said at the beginning of the show, I was identifying that with something that was materially wrong with Dakota. And I was able to separate those through my own language. And so your language unlocks your emotions. And that's why words are spelling, because they leave us in a trance. And that is ultimately what hypnosis is. It's not like this watch that goes back and forth and you slowly go into a trance. It's this idea that we can use our language and actual words to change our state. And our state, or our emotional state, runs our entire life. So to go back to, being positive and upbeat, one of the reasons why you're probably there is not only that you've been doing it for so long that it's automatic for you, Jason, which I totally recognize about you, your personality, is you are upbeat, you are easygoing, you are, you are a person who's able to find that gratitude. But if we were to go back in time and reverse it, I guarantee you that it started with language patterns of being like, wow, I am grateful. Wow, I am thankful for all that I have. And thus that puts us into a different state. So it can be complicated, but the simple version of it is our language unlocks our emotions.
And that goes back to your idea earlier of community as well. So it's probably because I've been part of that martial arts community since, I was in grade school. So I've been in a positive environment like that, and my family obviously too, but being a part of that type of an organization where everything was positive, we're taught habits we train or habits we gain, so what are the right types of habits that we're training, and probably just unconsciously, that's how I developed then.
Yeah, listen to that language pattern right there. Habits we train are habits we gain. How long has that been implemented into your unconscious?
Yeah.
Right.
Comparison and it's is a thief of joy. Another one. There's a million of them that I've heard since I was a little kid.
Yeah. Yep. And it makes sense.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit, because I want to make sure we talk a little bit more about you two. Describe, you're going to like this. Describe Community Solar Authority to me like I'm a second grader. Keep it simple for me. Community Solar Authority. What do you guys do? And tell me like I'm a kid.
We help power the world.
Okay.
And I would also say we help clean the world. I believe that, and this is me talking to you now, Jason, not a second grader, but my philosophy behind this is that our external world, the life that we see, is our perceived reality. Like, as human beings, we can never actually see true reality. We see it through a prism, through a skew. And it's our focus, our language patterns, or the way we believe, the things we believe about life, et cetera. But I believe our outer world is a reflection of what's going on inside. And so the way that I would explain it to a second grader is like, you see how there's trash everywhere? We help clean it up and make the world a better place. And that's what we do at Community Solar Authority.
What excites you most about the solar field?
What excites me about clean energy is this idea that we are constantly innovating. And this is true for any industry, but I just happen to find myself at the intersection of, sustainability and clean energy. And these conversations are becoming more and more important as we, upcycle into whatever's next for humanity. But I believe that just because we're using solar today doesn't mean that technology is going to be the same tomorrow. And even if it's not solar, some of the things that we're working on is paving the way for innovation for us to live in a better world. And I believe that, which is why it's easy for me to continue to work and, make the impact that we're doing, because I do truly believe that it's meaningful. I think, the more we can figure out energy and how to live, because again, it's a reflection of what's actually going on inside us. Like, if you run on clean fuel and you eat properly and follow a, clean nutrition, then you are naturally going to be more healthy than someone who doesn't. And so again, in our outer world, I think it works the exact same way. So it's cool to be working on things where we're making a pivot, and from the way the world used to look to what the future is going to be. And fingers crossed, we can make it a cleaner place that runs on effective energy that we can use to grow to whatever's next for us.
What made you decide to go it yourself as an entrepreneur versus, working for a company and, going a more traditional path?
Yeah, I became a door-to-door salesperson, like I said, and I was working for somebody else. And I realized in hindsight that all of my bosses were manipulating me. They stole from me. They overworked me. They didn't care about me. And when I had those realizations, once I was able to come, it was like an abusive relationship. Like, you can't see it until you're out of it. Mm-hmm. when I was on the other side of that, I was like, that's it. Like, I am not going to work for anyone else ever again. And you could say, like, back then I was a 1099, so I was self-employed. So I have not received my first W-2 job, and one of my only W-2 jobs ever was rolling burritos at Fajita Grill in Oswego in high school. And then after that, I got paid on commissions since I was 18, 19 years old. So I have always been self-employed, but this idea of like working for other people as a contractor, that really had a sour taste in my mouth once I learned that people were really just taking advantage of me. And so I was committed to, which is ultimately why I moved in 2017 to Italy. I was committed to learning entrepreneurship, understanding what it takes to run a business. And again, I think about goal setting and saying like, oh, I want to work from my laptop. I want my life to look this certain way. This was my mindset back then. And I had all of these goals and dreams and visions. And in hindsight, I realized that I didn't ask myself like, what do I need to do? It's like, what is it going to take? Because I was so committed to that end vision. And for me, I learned to just work backwards and reverse engineer. And it's like, okay, well, Dakota's individual freedom looks like I work where I want, when I want, by myself, for myself. I have amazing business partners now. And I was able to kind of have that vision and then just reverse engineer and work backwards. But for me, that's ultimately what led me into entrepreneurship. And I was just willing to do what it takes. I had been doing door-to-door sales for maybe half a decade at that point, 5, 6 years. And so I was very comfortable only getting paid for what I closed. For whatever I closed, I got paid on. That was my thing. And so it was very easy for me to be like, yeah, I don't need a salary, or yeah, I don't want to go work for somebody else because I know I can sell. And at the time, and I still believe this, sales is one of the highest paying jobs in the world. And so I was very comfortable at least trying to get out on my own. And then, shout out to my parents. They were always like, Dakota, if you fail, you can always come back to your childhood bedroom. And I needed to at certain points in my life. Yeah. But that kind of net and that kind of fallback, which is a privilege, it did allow me to grow and expand. I moved 40 times in my life so far. And a lot of it was just like room to room, house to house with a suitcase because I was doing door-to-door sales. But I was able to work from East Coast to West Coast, figure out what was important to me, what kind of environments did I want to be in. And so the choice for entrepreneurship was actually pretty easy for me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. It wasn't the traditional path for you. For most people it is, but that's not even how you really started. It was just, why wouldn't you? Because that's what you'd done pretty much your whole career after Fajita Grill. So it was just kind of the natural next step.
Yep. Yeah. And shout out to Fajita Grill.
I think it's still there.
It is.
Yeah. Yep. I was driving through Oswego a little while ago. One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on too is I've kind of admired your commitment to mentoring and helping people and helping the next generation. I understand now after the beginning of the conversation where it comes from. How does that look right now? What are you doing right now in terms of mentoring and giving back? And what are you currently doing and what do you get out of it? What do you enjoy most about it?
One of the things that made me start was this guilt that I had that I was never the best brother growing up. And again, externally, like, sure, maybe that was to my younger brothers. I'm the oldest son, second oldest child. But really, I was never kind to myself. And starting Better Brother, which is our mentorship community we have now, it really started as a philosophy that I want to teach young men to not step on the same tripwires that I did of extreme self-judgment, black and white success or failure metrics, and overall just being unaware of this whole world that exists inside of us. So I started Better Brother, which is just an online community. We meet weekly. We've got guys from all over that come in, and we just talk about what it's like to be a man, specifically a young man. And, there are 3 pieces. Like, we want people to learn skills. We want people to explore their inner world and discuss themes around this. And we want people to ultimately discover this idea of self-sovereignty, or that ultimately we are in charge of our own lives. It's this idea of ownership. And so, it's funny, Jason, because I get off of those calls and I'm like, wow, this impacted me in such a big way. And I'm learning things from these younger guys that is allowing me to see myself better.
Mhm.
And we have certain ways that we set up the calls to have these deeper, intimate conversations, confidentiality being one of them as an example. But a few more are like honesty. And I compare it to like if we were all sitting around a pond or a pool of water together, the more honest we can be with ourselves, the stiller that water will be. And ultimately, the more still the water is, the better reflection we can see ourselves. But then also for the community of men, the better everybody else can see themselves too. Because the whole point of getting together in this kind of community is to use each other as a mirror so that we can see ourselves better.
Mhm.
And the less honest we are with ourselves, with the other brothers in the room, is essentially putting a ripple across this water. And so it encourages people to not only be accountable for being honest with what they're experiencing and what I'm experiencing, but also for the sake so that everybody there is getting the most out of these sessions. And I think that that's really been interesting. Another idea is ownership. And, again, this goes back to the self sovereignty piece, but the example that we always use is like, when you're at the gym and someone walks over to your machine that you were just on or you were about to use and you get pissed off. And it's like we make these assumptions about what everybody else believes and how everybody else feels. And it's kind of like when you say, "Hey, how are you?" And they're like, "I'm good. How are you?" And we just ignore it for the sake of politeness instead of saying like how we're actually doing. It's this idea of assuming that other people believe what we believe. And then, the other person will be like, "Oh, yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean." But it's not true. And so it's this idea that we need to take ownership. So it's like when someone takes the equipment that I was about to use at the gym, I get pissed. And we're taking ownership of what we're actually experiencing. And again, that allows us to see ourselves better. And so this community is really all about those three things, learning new skills, exploring our inner world and themes around being a man, but then also this idea of self-sovereignty, which we can't have without this idea of taking ownership of our own lives.
Awesome. Um, well, based on that, what habits, men or women, what habits should young people be developing in your eyes that'll help them over the next 10, 20 years? So, they're, say like my twins, they're 22 or 21, going to be 22. What are some habits that you'd recommend for that age group to help them become successful?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jason, because going back to the Gene Keys, which is a book that I read a lot of books, as you can see behind me. This is one of my probably 5 bookshelves in my house. Um, I believe that that's a really hand-tailored approach.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I admire about the Gene Keys is it's this idea that consciousness is coming into the world and there are 1 through 64 different genes that show up in our bodies, in our DNA, and they all get expressed in different ways. And so for one person, one habit may be something that they really should instill or should work on per se, but then that might not be valuable for someone else because they're on a different journey. And so, we can talk about like building good habits in general, which I think is almost like self-explanatory. Um, the one that rises to the top is like being kind to yourself and taking care of yourself. I think at a baseline, if we can do that and then be open to our experiences, those are some things that I think anybody could take away. Because if you all of a sudden start to become more kind to yourself, you're going to start to look at the world in a different way. And then you can start to understand yourself a little bit more, which is the most important thing when it comes to understanding which habits are going to help you. Because again, one good habit might not help the next person. And so I do think it is something that is kind of hand tailored to the person, but that's why we have those conversations. And, I work with young men, so that's why I talk about it. Of course, this applies to women as well. But when we're in our groups at Better Brother every single week, we're exploring themes of working through these shadows and being able to sit with being uncomfortable. Something that I think fills the world right now is this idea of distraction. So easy to just pick up her phone or get on TikTok or go check Instagram or go binge Netflix or video games. And I'm guilty of all of these things. Metaphorically, I don't have TikTok or Instagram, et cetera. But metaphorically, I'm guilty of distraction. And one of the ways that we solve distraction is understanding what is going to enrich our lives, because there's nothing inherently wrong with any of those things. But it's about being sovereign and saying, I'm doing this because it enriches my life. And so, finding the habit of being able to work through these shadows Distraction is just one of 64 examples in this book of the gene keys. It's just one that I'm working through right now. Essentially being able to sit with the things that make you uncomfortable and the things that are difficult, and just being patient with that, not trying to fix it, not trying to change it, not trying to escape it. That will reveal new insights and wisdom to you that will completely illuminate other areas of your life, which I think is one of the most beautiful habits that you could instill in your own life, is just the ability to sit with your thoughts, your language patterns, and the way that you feel.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to get into our last section. These are just quick ones, quick hits. Besides the gene key, what's another great book recommendation for us?
One of my most recommended books, Jason, is Boyd Vardy, and he wrote a book called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. And quick story on Boyd, he is a personal development coach now. He grew up in the African bush. His family had bought a scrubby patch of land and ultimately transformed it into the London Losey Safari, where they bring tourists from all over the world and they give them amazing experiences through tracking lions and other animals. Boyd learned how to track from old lineages of people in Africa, and he correlates this idea of tracking lions to how we can track our own internal world in life. It's a quick read. It's a very small book, but Boyd is such a good storyteller. He's extremely insightful. He's got a couple of great podcasts if you just type his name into wherever you listen to podcasts. But A Lion Tracker's Guide to Life is one of my most gifted books. And then I've got this yellow book behind me, which I've personally read over 14 times, Jason. And it's a book called Never Split the Difference. And it's actually a book on negotiation. Written by a guy. Yeah, it was written by Chris Voss, who's fascinating. He was the lead FBI hostage negotiator at a global level. And he wrote a book on all of his experiences and stories trying to free hostages and how that correlates to life, because life is a negotiation, whether it's business or buying a car or having really any sort of interpersonal interaction with someone. On one level or another, you are essentially negotiating. And it's this idea of, like, so many times, again, unconsciously, we're like, let's just split it 50-50. And his whole philosophy is like, you can't do that when it comes to hostages. So here's what to do instead. And so I think it's a really good book.
Awesome. So obviously you're well-traveled and adventurous. How many countries have you been to?
I'd say 17, 18,
17,
somewhere
18.
in there.
Favorite country?
Colombia.
Colombia. Okay. Dream place you haven't been yet?
I really wanted to go to Peru this year with my dad. So that's at the top of my list.
Awesome. Two more. What's something that people would be surprised to hear about you?
Something people would be surprised to hear about me. I have no idea, Jason.
You're an open book. That's why, right?
Yeah.
All right. Last one. One food you could eat every week and not get tired of.
One food I could eat every week and not get right now, my obsession is St. Louis pizza and wings. Shout out to those guys.
How's it different than New York pizza?
In St. Louis, it's actually very different. We have thin crust, square sliced pizza. So it was definitely a huge change coming from New York, being a pizza connoisseur. It's no Cam's Pizzeria. Shout out to Cam's, but it's one of the best here locally. So we take what we can get out here.
Yeah. Anything I forgot to talk about that you want to mention?
Jason, thank you for having me on. No, I super appreciate you. These are some of my favorite conversations.
Yeah, I know you're huge into LinkedIn. How do they find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Dakota Malone. I talk a lot about clean energy and our work, but I also talk about all of these things that we spoke about today. I was actually meeting with an energy advisor the other day, and he's like, Dakota, like, you're not even posting things about work every day. Like, I just don't get it. Like, someone told me this isn't Facebook and I can't do that. I was like, dude, I talk about my entire life on LinkedIn. Like, it does not matter to me. And I don't feel any sort of judgment if people feel that way. So if you are interested in anything we talked about today, I encourage people to connect with me there.
Yeah. I was saying you have some great stuff on Medium too. I clicked over there. A lot of the stuff you put on LinkedIn, you put over there, but a lot of it is this personal development type stuff too. You have some good posts over there too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you. You're obviously a great friend, but you're also, a super smart guy, and you have tons to share. So I appreciate you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me, Jason. Super appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.